Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Iannini, and I'm joined today by Dan Brown, who's the Director of Professional Learning and Development at Dulwich College, Singapore. I met Dan quite a few years ago when we were working together in a professional development course that I coordinated for Acamas. During that course, I had learned a lot about Dan in terms of his work with middle leaders, and in particular, the development work that he was doing by organizing a network of schools in Singapore. So when it comes to selecting the right middle leader, I know Dan is the person to give us not only, the best practices that we should be looking at, but he also has a really broad perspective of what a lot of schools do, because he convenes a lot of these schools every year in what is a phenomenally large middle leader development program. Dan, I try to do some justice to your background with an introduction, but please feel free to elaborate, and especially in the areas that relate to middle leadership development and selection.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. So we've run a middle leader program across the schools in Singapore for the last 8 years now. Many years ago, I saw a need to work together as a group of schools. We're all paying separate providers lots of money. And I thought, wouldn't it be much better if we could not only save money by working together, but also share experiences of people across the schools. And the course would be so much better from getting the opportunity to speak to people and learn from people who do similar jobs in similar schools. And the program's grown and grown, and we now do a level 2 leadership program called the Extending Leadership Program as well. So yeah, lots of experience in the middle leader field.
Yeah, I think that's, again, considering the number of schools you work with and the people you have to coordinate with, you probably hear a lot about their various experiences in selecting the right leaders, frustrations as well. So I'd like to lead with this idea of how to select the right middle leader. And in particular, what do you believe are the best practices for selecting the right middle leader, whether it be a head of faculty or a head of year, potentially even a coordinator?
Well, I think the things we're mainly looking for is passion, enthusiasm, some proactivity, that they're mainly focused on the children and not on themselves. Some experience helps, but it's not vital. So we need to discover that through either their letter of application or through the interview process. And we try and do that by asking questions that really focus on impact. So not things like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? It's what have you done? And then what we're looking for is for that person to show, firstly, that they've actually initiated the change themselves. They've gone forward. This is something personal to them, a change that they brought forward and not something they just joined in with someone else. We're looking for them to show some impact of the change. Have they been through the whole process? They haven't just changed something. Have they evaluated whether that change has had any impact? And in particular, whether it's had any impact on learning and the students in the school, because that's why we're here. We're here for learning and we're here for student well-being. So we need to see that that person is focused on the students.
I think that's really great that you've identified that the interview process goes beyond what the typical and traditional interview is and might consist of just looking at strengths and weaknesses, to going to that next level and recognizing middle leaders as change agents, being very important to leading change and not just initiating it, but being there to evaluate it and understanding the impact that they've had. So with that in mind, when you think about some of these other attributes that you've raised, such as passion and being proactive, and creating some form of impact in student learning, how have you identified those attributes specific to Dulwich College such that it will lead to those middle leaders' success?
In terms of Dulwich, and I'm sure every school is the same, we have our own mission and vision of the school, and we want to make sure that the people will fit our mission and vision. So for example, at Dulwich, one of our mission statements is that students come first. And another is talking about our pioneering spirit. So they would be attributes that we'd be looking for in people's application process and people's interviews. Have they actually made reference to those things, or have they done things that show that this is important to them? So through the interview process, we would ask questions specific to the school's mission and vision to try and identify whether they fit with the school. We would also look at the attributes needed for the team. In certain circumstances, you may need a different type of person. If the rest of the math department is very inexperienced, you might need a more experienced person who's got particular experience in a certain curriculum, for example. And in other circumstances, you might need, you might be more broad, and you could have many different attributes that would be successful in that particular team. So the school needs are important, the team needs are important, and then we will also look at that individual and what they can offer that's a little bit different. And in terms of those attributes, it really all comes across both in the letter and the interview. You can show passion and enthusiasm both through your letter and your interview, and you can show proactivity by showing what you've actually done and what you've led. So we would be looking specifically in the letter and interview for those aspects.
Something that you just said, which is actually a main theme in my book, is that no team is the same. And it was interesting because just now you identified that if there is particularly a team that is fairly newly formed, it's going to need a more experienced leader to help them understand what is going to be required of that team and get used to the processes and the curriculum, assessment, and those types of things at the school. So in that case, a more experienced team leader is needed. But what if, for instance, you have a team that is very well formed, has a lot of experienced educators? Do you still need to have an experienced team leader to lead them?
I would say absolutely not. I've seen some very successful teams of experienced people led by people with limited experience in the past. As long as that person has the skills and the attributes and the passion to lead, I think they can definitely be the right person. And they will get respect from those other more experienced people just from asking the right questions, doing the right things, and showing trust. It's something that's come to mind as you're just saying that was actually a very successful leadership decision that we made many years ago when I was back in the UK, where we had an English department that was struggling, and we were struggling to find a good leader. And we made the decision that we would move the head of maths to become the head of English, which at the time I was quite concerned about as part of a team that made the decision, but I had concerns, even though I knew the person was a very good leader. And it actually worked really well. That person had the ability to ask the right questions, say the right things, challenge people when needed to. And it really didn't matter that he didn't have any experience with English in this situation, as long as he could actually use the other attributes that are available in the team and learn from them. And it actually worked really well and was very successful. And I think it's something that we could actually think about a bit more.
3 things that I've learned today from this interview with you, Dan, and that's going to help me just in terms of my work that I do with, Council of International Schools, at ACAMIS, is that when we take a look at recruiting middle leaders, we have to understand that this role is incredibly important towards leading change initiatives. It's got to be more than just identifying strengths and weaknesses, or whether or not it's a role that they really want and they're willing to learn in. They have to have actually been able to demonstrate where they've taken the lead in change before, regardless of if they had a role in leadership. Can they demonstrate that they were proactive in leading some initiative, as well as seeing it through and evaluating it? And then when we take a look at identifying the attributes for a successful leader in our school, I really like the fact that you bring it back to the mission and the vision, because the interview is an opportunity to reinforce those things that are important to the school, as well as to reinforce the culture that the leaders want to build. So in that particular case, by being able to identify specific value traits and then bringing those into the interview, where the candidate has to be able to demonstrate how they will have represented those types of values, is also incredibly important. But lastly, and again, one of the things that I find is incredibly helpful and reaffirming in terms of my book is the fact that you don't need to be the most experienced person to lead a team. Now, there are times when you want experience, especially with a new team, but there's also times when the team might just need something else, somebody a little bit more dynamic, new ideas, lots of energy. So we have to differentiate our expectations for middle leaders based on what the needs of the team are, based on what the needs of the school are and based on what those capabilities that the team leader has. Dan, I want to thank you so much for participating in today's interview, helping us better understand how to select the right leader for our teams. Thank you, Dan, for that wonderfully inspiring anecdote and those final words on how to select the right middle leader.